My name is Catherine Harrison, and welcome to the second season of The Power of Five. This is episode 1 of the second season, the sophomore season, so it's going to be very exciting. Power of Five is where we bring 5 behavior change specialists from around the world to discuss topics related to leadership. And our intention is that hopefully in listening to our dialogue, it triggers something in you that makes you think, maybe I could do something differently in my place of work, whether I am a leader or I work with leaders or I support leaders. It's really just to have a conversation to trigger other conversations out there in the world of work. We've covered a lot of leadership topics in season 1. We've talked a lot about trust, empowerment, values-based behaviors, delegation, failure, etc. And I'd like to kick off season 2 by asking something with respect to how organizations and companies and brands have shown up in the world over the past 6 months with respect to, hey, we've gone through a pandemic. There's significant social unrest. There are significant environmental issues that are happening right now. And I'd like to ask the crew to weigh in on how does what goes on within an organization show up outside the organization? So as customers and clients and humans around the world are going through all these changes, how are they perceiving companies right now? And how might all of that leadership stuff we talked about in season 1 start to bubble over into the brand recognition, the brand loyalty, and ultimately the viability of the business? So Sean, I'm going to kick it over to you to weigh in on this and just start the conversation.
I love this conversation, and the way that I would talk about it is 2 ways. 1, internally with your team or your staff, and 2, externally to the rest of the world. What I have noticed, mostly in Zoom calls or telephone calls, because we're not meeting in person, is when I ask people how things are going, there's 2 things that are happening. And these are people that maybe never really told me anything about their work before. They're either raving about how much their company has showed up and helped each other out and had empathy for each other, and they can't help but rave and how proud they are. That's one extreme. And the other one, you can guess, is at the other end about how disappointed they are about how people are treated. And I think that's really the ultimate acid test. I used to say pre-COVID, when you ask somebody at a cocktail party or in the hockey locker room, for me, tell me about your job or your employer, that's the real test, right? Their answer. So I think internally, you can't fake that. You either showed up or you cared or you asked the questions. You can't fake that. People are breaking down in staff meetings. You can't fake your response. So that's number 1 internally. And if you actually take care, I mean, there's so many quotes on this. If you take good care of your team and your employees, you don't really have to worry about the rest, right? Because they're going to be your public ambassadors. The second part is externally. So how are you showing up to your clients? How are you showing up in the world? This is not about putting a TV commercial on about how you're serving coffee or whatever to the frontline workers to make yourself look good. If I see another one of those self-serving commercials, oh my God. It's about what you do. So it's showing people, not telling people, not making this fancy statement from the CEO, not this Twitter thing. It's how are you showing up? Are you showing up for your best clients? And I will go back to, and I know I said this in one of the early episodes of season 1, the best piece of advice, and I'll give props to Chris Taylor at Actionable Conversations, was just serve the people that you love and care for. And I didn't know what that meant. And how many videos on my phone later, I think my wife, her arm is like sore from holding the camera. Not just the ones on LinkedIn or publicly, but the ones personally, the connections. Hey, thought I'd send you a video, or to like some of the sales teams I work with. Hey, you know what? I know this is hard for you. Like So just showing people, not telling people. And I think actually my brand loyalty to some brands has gone up exponentially in the last 5 months. And some other ones, good luck getting my business back.
Yeah.
Shauna, there's something there that you said that struck me, and I'm going to take this beyond COVID too, but especially on LinkedIn, if you look over the last 6 months, there's been plenty of people talking about COVID and leadership, and then you layer on top of it some of the things that have happened with race relations and inequality and all those types of things. It's been fascinating to me, the number of posts that happened within the first month. And then the question was, is that going to continue? And the answer was, for the most part, no. And so it's been fascinating to me to watch the companies that have stuck with it, that have consistently, used that drumbeat to talk about what's important to them, how they can serve their customers, how they can serve their communities in any way, and the ones that didn't, right? And to me, that's a reflection of what's going on in the inside, is if this is important to you and it's who you are, you can't help but do it, right? Whether it's inside the organization or outside the organization. And if you're an organization that's kind of faking it, or maybe even considering faking it till you make it, it just doesn't last. And so I have a lot of respect for the organizations who have said from the beginning, this is who we are, and then backed it up with their words and actions over time, versus the companies, like you said, that got out in the community or got on, posted some videos or whatever else about how much they care. And now we can't find them. We don't know where they're at. We don't know what they're doing. So kudos.
You know what? I just want to circle back on the first question, because if you think about the people within those organizations, and I guess even organizations who maybe have, if it's not sincere, a good enough PR or comms team, but the people in the organizations, if they feel that front is different than what actually goes on behind the curtain, that's going to erode the culture and the leadership impact and the trust even further, right? That's just what's bubbling up for me, because I know some people are like, oh, sure, on TV the company's doing all this great stuff, but it's just a gong show here at the not at the office, but in our world of work, in our experience right now.
Sure. Well, I think this is where the rubber hits the road, right? Everyone's got values, right? Like organizations go to great lengths to create their values, and then they sit on a wall, or they're put on a t-shirt or a coffee mug or whatever they do with them. And it's in the bad times that you actually understand whether or not these values mean anything or not. In the good times, it's easy because everything's just going very smoothly. But how do you want to show up, to your point, guys, is how do you want to show up when things are tough? And this was the toughest of times. And quick story, so one of my clients, when COVID hit, they instantly turned to their values. The C-suite literally took the values, pulled them into a boardroom, read through them, and they said line by line, if courage is one of our values, what does it look like now to be courageous? If people is really one of our values, what does it look like for us to put our people first? And where they ended up making decisions, and I think this is outstanding, they decided not to lay off a single person. They want to make sure that every single person got paid. They made sure that everyone was safe back in their homes. They reached out to all of their customers to ask if they were okay and how are they surviving. They went and made some big decisions that actually took a financial hit for them. So the finance wasn't the thing, but they lived those values because they knew if we're going to put these out there, we got to live them in the best of times and in the worst of times, and this is definitely the worst of times. And so, I think it's an interesting question about how do people on the inside, or what goes on the inside shows up on the outside, and this is it. And Joel, I think, to your point about it, when we talk about vision and purpose and mission, that's actually the frontline worker. They live that, right? That's where it shows up, because if they're not working in such a way that is executing a vision and a purpose and a mission, then you can pretty much guarantee everything behind it isn't working either, right? But that's the true test, right? And Here in Canada, not so long ago, we had a situation with one of our major banks where a grandfather and a granddaughter for, Catherine and Sean, you may remember this story, went to open up a bank account. They were Indigenous and they got arrested because they didn't have any ID. And the bank was embarrassed and did all these apologies and all that stuff, but nowhere in their system would they have had a policy that says, hey, if people don't have proper ID, make sure you arrest them or call the police, or that's not this. But if this is how the people are behaving, what's going on the inside, right? That's got them to think that this is the right course of action. So it's fascinating how it will show up.
I agree, and I think we heard in our sort of wrap-up episode for the first season, we heard Dennis talking about the fact that many organisations jumped in, they did retrenchments, they put people on half pay, they did all that kind of stuff. The same thing's been happening in Australia, and I think to go to your point, Todd, if people are, and you hear a lot of organisations say people are our most important asset, well, why do we get rid of our most important asset first? So if what's happening on the inside is that we're not valuing them, we're not challenging our creativity, our curiosity, our innovation to actually get those people to find new ways of going to market and inspiring them, and maybe taking, maybe having a look at the profit that we've been making over the years and saying, okay, so for the next couple of years, we're not going to make a profit for these reasons. And, shareholders, this is why, because we're all in this together. And if I have to hear that statement one more time, and yet you look at the people who say it, you think, you're not. You're not all in this together. You've got your $1 million pay that you take home and all your shares, and you're getting rid of all the little people, So I think that really does get amplified. And I think, to your point, is looking at how can we support the people? How do we then use different scenario planning, or using different, and we all know there's so many different techniques you can use from a curiosity innovation perspective. And I know when I worked in South Africa, our managing partner was walking around like a bear with a sore head, and he was usually such a lovely man, and eventually I was the one that was brave enough to say to him, what the hell is going on, And he said, well, you have no idea what I have to do. And I said, well, no, obviously I don't, but maybe you should tell me. And he said, the firm wasn't going very well, the bottom line was suffering, and that he had to get rid of 10 people. And I said to him, oh, right. I said, so what makes you so special that you're the only one that knows that's the way we have to go? And he looked at me and I said, well, that's one way you can cut the money. I said, why don't you tell us how much money you have to find? And then why don't we get the whole firm together? And why don't we all explore? I said, we've got, hundreds of heads out here to explore. Long story short, we saved almost 4 times what he wanted. Well, we created 4 times more when we got rid of not a single person, because every single person in that firm found different ways to either save money or go and find new clients.
It's interesting, Mandy, that you say that, because pre-COVID feels like it was 20 years ago and it was like 6 months ago. What type of culture and company and brand you were in February, you are even more of that now. So if you didn't care about your people and your customers, oh my God, you're getting exposed big time now. And if you did, it's the other way. And so, I say this from playing hockey, beer league hockey. We play 5 players on a side, but some tournaments are 4-on-4. And I remember our team accidentally got into a 4-on-4 tournament, and I was like, oh my God, we're going to be exposed. There's nowhere to hide out there. You can't hide a poor player on 4-on-4. But it's the same with companies now. Time of crisis or time of extreme abundance, we become more of what we already are.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. So let's say there is a self-aware leader out there listening to this, and in their epiphany, they're like, oh my God, I I was doing that. I was doing that thing that I didn't want to be doing. And oh my God, it's been 6 months. And yeah, we did a couple nice things at the beginning. Oh my God. But to Sean's point, I guess all hope is lost because I'm just going to keep doing this. What is the advice to leaders who may have felt that, hey, you know, rightly or wrongly, because they're human too, and they've been going through an unprecedented time for many, many months with all of these myriad complexities. What can they do if that hasn't necessarily been, you know, the go-to, or that hasn't in fact been the way that they've been operating? What do you do 6 months afterwards?
Be courageous. That's what you do. And you say courageously that you have been a human who's made some mistakes. You haven't always got it right, and you definitely didn't get this right, and I'm sorry. And actually lay it out there and just say, let's regroup, let's reframe, let's reboot. You know, all the different things that we've been talking about in our earlier sessions. But I think people will respect you far more if you just own it. And I mean, and this goes, as a mum, I remember saying to my girls the one time I went in and I said, you know what, I got this wrong, I'm sorry. And they looked at me and they said, what? Because they wanted to shout at me, you know, and they said, well, but we're angry. And I said, and so you should be, because I'm wrong. I got this wrong. And they were like, but that's not what mothers do. And I go, yeah, well, I've never been the mother of 2 children before, and I'm going to make lots of mistakes. So, you know, I made a mistake. And we sat down and had an amazing conversation. So I think that's what we have to do. We as leaders cannot have all the answers. We've never been here before. We don't have experience in this, and we're going to make mistakes. Like we said before.
And what if that notion is, yeah, okay, be courageous. What explicitly does that look like for someone who hasn't developed that skill of making those courageous choices or deciding to shift things? What can you get a little more tangible? What might that courageous leadership actually look and feel like?
Well, I personally would say I would sit down, even if I had to script it, and I would know that my voice would be shaky, and I would actually, and that would be an indication to me that, and my face would be, you know, I'd be all hot and sweaty and, you know, red face, and I'd feel really, really sick to the stomach. Then I would know that I'm being courageous. So if you don't have those feelings, then you're not pushing yourself far enough. And you have that shaky voice, and you write it down so that you choose language that you know is important to you, but that in the spur of the moment you might go into fight or flight, but you want to stay in flow. So, and you say that to people, you say, this is really hard for me. Does that would be what I'd say.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's really important that, you know, these kinds of behaviors or even shifts in behaviors don't come naturally. That's why they're hard to do. And sometimes we really need to break it down to those micro behaviors or micro tasks or micro decision points so that people can actually go, okay, how would I even start to put this into motion? So thank you for that. Yeah, man.
Yeah. And I would follow that up as well with here's a clear intention of what I do want to see. So, you know, this is what we had. I'm sorry. Like Mandy's 100% right. Next step then, you know, but this is what I would like to see, and this is what we're going to work towards, and I'm committed to doing it. And then you start doing the new behavior. Here's the thing that I'm going to do next. And it's not going to be perfect, but you have to step into it.
And I think it goes to the culture that you had pre-COVID, that if you had a culture that did not reward taking chances or being honest or being vulnerable, then you got to start there and admit your past mistakes. And I know there's lots of stuff going on in North America. It's like, we have to really accept our history first before we can actually move on and be courageous. And that's part of being courageous.
Yeah. And notice even that although you may have, as this leader, had this epiphany and had all that anxiety and discomfort around employing this courage, but that the people who've been operating in this culture for many years might not even be as nice as your daughters, Mandy. They might be sitting there going, yeah, whatever. Like, I'll believe it when I see it, right? So that even though you might have had this, you know, growth moment, that the even beyond the impact might not be as you know, simple or as easy to actually implement and then sustain as you would hope, just because you've done the heavy lifting.
Well, that's why I think it's interesting, Catherine, when you say that, because I think this all goes back to trust, right? So when we do make mistakes and we own up to it, you know, owning up to it hopefully starts to gain some trust back, but we've lost it, right? We've lost trust by operating in that way. And so, you know, when you go back to some of, you know, Covey's work around, you know, how do I build trust and how do I lose trust? And it takes a heck of a lot more deposits over time with trust than it takes withdrawals. I mean, if I blow it, people aren't going to trust me as much as they did before, but it's going to take me a while to earn back that trust. So as Mandy said, I think owning it and being out there and open and transparent is important, but you also have to understand that you can't just flip that switch and expect everybody to turn around and trust you, right? There is a prove it factor. And so, yes, they're going to watch you and they're going to maybe sit back in their chairs and say, okay, let's see if this is really the case. And that's where the hard work is in leadership. It's that consistency, it's that sustainability, and it's going back to work every day and being courageous, as Mandy would say, and doing the hard things over and over again, even though they're hard.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think you can link it back to, I think it was something that Sean said in one of our earlier episodes, is almost sitting down, you take your suit of armor off and you say what you've done to protect yourself, and then encourage others to take their suit of armor off. Some of them will and some of them won't be ready because, like you say, Joel, they're not ready to do that. They don't have that level of trust with you because they're still going, oh, yeah, what are you going to do with that if I tell that to you? But, you know, it's about trying to create that culture of, I'll take my armor off. I'm going to own what I've done. I'm here to support you to do the same. And it's going to have to be on your time frame. I've got to try and create the environment for you to be able to do it quicker, but I'm not going to be able to make you do it.
Yeah, I'm going to say something and you might hear howling hounds in the background because, of course, there seems to be a direct correlation with me being on Zoom and my dogs losing their mind. So to that point, one of, I think, the toughest parts of behaving courageously was making that decision and then not getting the response from the people who look at me, I'm now behaving courageously and transparently and I'm taking off my armor, and how come everybody isn't responding the way that they want? Even noticing and preparing for that moment, which is, and I'm going to have to be okay with it not working. Ooh, that's another, you know, step. Because I've seen, you know, just the walls of defensiveness come up immediately, you know.
So I'm gonna give, this will sound like a commercial for Catherine's upcoming book, which I think is going to be available on pre-order on Amazon very shortly. But you had mentioned to me, Catherine, that the stories that you're sharing, a lot of your clients might not know. And they're very personal and very vulnerable. That takes a lot of courage. And some of them might not like that. Some of them will. You don't know. But when we actually find out and show up 100% as ourselves, that's true leadership.
Thank you, Sean. I owe you $100 at least.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, and I guess just as we wrap up, you know, how will organizations continue to connect, really, and a very explicit impact on business too, continue to connect that how values-based behaviors attached to the mission, attached to the stuff on the walls, as Todd always says, will in fact be seen by customers, and particularly, like, people will vote with their money, right? People are making very conscious choices now that are more aligned with some of their values, you know, socioeconomically, et cetera. And so just what are some top line thoughts or just recommendations, perhaps that hasn't been said or that really is going to be top of mind for you as you go back and speak with some of your folks?
One of the things is, oh, Mandy. Sorry, no, you go, Joel. I was just going to say, is alignment of brand and culture. right? And in organizations, we've had brands sit with marketing and we've had culture sit with HR, and they compete for budget, all that kind of stuff. If we're serious about bringing inside and outside together, we're get serious about brand and culture being one word, brand culture.
Yeah.
All I was going to say, just in listening to this, I think that the aha for me is, if there was ever a time that mission and values matter, it's right now, right? I mean, I don't think it's over exaggerating that the very life of your company could depend on it, right? That you are who you say you are, that you are open and transparent about what you are going to do, what you aren't going to do. And I have a lot of respect for the companies. Mandy had talked about, let's do everything we can not to lose people. And I have a lot of respect for those companies, but I also have a lot of respect for the companies that in the midst of having to make those tough decisions are just open and honest about the why, right? Yep. And it's interesting to me. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. This video will be on LinkedIn. I've seen companies where when they've laid off employees, part of their message is, we will do everything we can to help find you a job. And the people within that organization are posting the same thing. And the people who have been laid off have said, it was such a fantastic time working for this company, and I'm so happy, even in the midst of all that's going on. I'm going to move into my next opportunity. You don't get that unless people are actually living out their values and their mission.
That's right.
Yeah. And as a consumer, do you not want to, if you need whatever they're selling, to support that company?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm asking you that question.
Yes, absolutely. There was a preemptive mute, but yes, absolutely.
And I think when you said, Catherine, like, what's the one action step for a leader? I always go to this number one. It's not the middle finger. It's the number one finger. Pick one employee that you could actually show up and express those mission and values to today, and pick one customer and let everybody do that and forget about what's on the walls, but actually live it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree on the values things. I think that's the key piece. It's the behaviors that are the values. And I would say, the action item I would tie to it is make sure that every single person in your organization knows what the values behaviors look like to them, to their personal job, right? So you're not just espousing, here's how we as an organization will show up, because that can be too broad. Like how does every single individual contributor, leader of others, it doesn't matter who you are or where you are in the organization, what does it look like to you in these behaviors so that you're living the values?
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much. I know that I've got lots out of this. And in fact, I'm hoping to watch it myself just so I can write stuff down, because I didn't have a chance to write stuff down. But hopefully the viewers also found some nuggets, even if it was just one thing that really resonated with you in terms of what you can bring back to your own organization, or even as a consumer or a customer, to start watching for those signals that really demonstrate what an organization is all about as we move forward through this really interesting, fascinating experience that globally we're all going through. So thanks, of course, to my colleagues, Joel and Mandy, Sean and Todd. And thank you again for tuning in. Beginning of season 2, we'll be coming at you with another episode soon. Stay well. And we'll talk soon.